Today we're talking with our Merle Delagrange, and the interviewer is Michael McGregor with the Grand Valley State University's Veterans Oral History Project. To begin with, Merle, where and when were you born?
I was born in Indiana, Grantwood, Indiana, 1950, January 23rd. And when I was probably about 10, we moved to Ohio and went to school at the inn and went to school at Fairview over by Sherwood, Ohio. And of course, you know, superintendent I got into it, so I didn't graduate. And I was planning on joining the Army, but then I was having too much fun. And then I met my wife, so in '68, and we were planning, we were pretty close, and then all my buddies had got drafted at 18, and I didn't think I was going to get drafted, so we decided we'd get married instead, and then I get my draft notice to go for my physical. So I went for my physical, and of course I had 20/20 and 100% hearing, so I was class 1A, and so we talked about it, and we decided to go ahead and get married anyway, so we did. And 2 months later, on May the 6th, I was greeted by Uncle Sam. So
May the 6th, what year?
yeah, in 1969, 2 months after we got married. Yeah, we got married March the 8th, and so I got drafted out of Cleveland, Ohio, and went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for my basic, and from there I went to Fort Polk for AIT.
Okay, but before you get into service, what did your parents do?
Okay, my father was a farmer, and then in '62, when I was 12, he started driving truck. He drove a ready-mix truck for a concrete company, and my mother was always stayed-at-home mom, you know.
Did you have any siblings?
Yeah, I had 3 brothers and 5 sisters.
Oh, big family.
So, yeah. And we were, like I say, always lived on a farm until my dad started driving truck, and
Okay. As growing up, then while you were in high school, and that, what did you know or hear about the Vietnam War?
well, being in a small community, a lot of my friends, older friends, were getting drafted and going off to Vietnam. And I know one night my buddy and I were cruising, and the radio was on, and they were talking about this big battle, you know, a lot of guys dying and that. And I told my buddy, I said, you know, I have a feeling that I'm going to end up over there. And sure enough, I did.
So you got married and then you got drafted.
Yeah.
You had to report about two months later.
Yeah, right.
Basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
That's correct, yeah.
How did you adjust to basic training?
At first, I didn't really care about it because my name was D-E-L-A, and the guy in front of me that went, the last guy to 1st platoon, was DeLong, and he should have been in 2nd platoon, and I was supposed to be in 1st platoon. Well, 2 days later they caught it, and then from then on it seemed like that drill sergeant just didn't like me, but we did a lot of push-ups and yeah.
Can you remember any of your drill instructors' names?
No, I can't. I can see their faces, but I just can't recall their names. But our drill instructor for 1st platoon, he had been with the 25th Infantry. But back then, I can't remember if he had a CIB or not, you know, so I'm not sure if he was infantry or
right.
what his MOS was. But first day, he said, we got 9 weeks, and there will be that plaque for 1st place in our barracks for the whole 9 weeks. And of course, we were 1st platoon, and we were 1st in everything. And we're supposed to be entitled to eat first, right? Well, that wasn't true. We hit the ladder bars. We didn't do so many, I think it was 43 bars, I think 25 push-ups. by the time you got ready to go into the chow line, everybody else been out of the mess hall, and you walked in, and they filled your tray, and all of a sudden, you've been in here too long, get out. So we're eating on the way out to the garbage can, and I never liked cottage cheese. And it just so happens that one meal, there was cottage cheese and fruit cocktail close together. I ended up liking cottage cheese.
So the one drill instructor was a Vietnam veteran. Were the others Vietnam veterans that you know?
All of them were Vietnam veterans except for one. I think he was 2nd platoon, and he hadn't been overseas.
Okay.
So he must have been a pretty good instructor through his own training that he got stateside, I imagine. Yeah.
Were your drill instructors keying any of the stuff that you had to do towards Vietnam, or talking about lessons from Vietnam, or pay attention to this especially because,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing?
Yeah, they definitely worked on, as if everybody was going to be a combat soldier, because we did a lot of hand-to-hand and other skills that the average soldier probably would never use unless you was infantry, And yeah, I learned. I made one mistake. There was 9 of us qualified with the M60 machine gun. I think that's why I got the 11 Bravo.
So you got to shoot a machine gun in
basic.
basic.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we qualified with the M60, and we shot the 45 for a little bit, but nothing to qualify. And of course, we had the M14 back then. And I still remember the one young soldier next to me, the drill sergeant. "What do you have in your hand?" He said, "My gun." So he made me run around the company area. I'm not going to go into detail.
Yeah. This is my rifle, this is my gun, this
Yeah.
is for shooting, and this is for fun.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So then the young man sat down again, and 5 minutes later, he caught him again.
You like being singled out.
Yeah.
Okay, so the basic training lasts, what you said, 9 weeks?
It was 9 weeks,
So
Fort
9
Campbell.
weeks.
Yeah.
And when during basic did you get your orders for AIT?
It was probably close to the end. I'd say probably towards the last week. But the last week, the 9th week, we did a lot of training, refreshing training, so we could pass the test, at the end, the hand-to-hand, all that stuff. And it was a rainy day, and they had us in this little, I call it a cattle shed. It was just a roof and 4 posts, and the whole platoon was in there doing rifle drill. And the guy in front of me, when we were going up like this, he was coming back like that, hit me in the chins. And it didn't really hurt, but then we had to march back to chow at noon, and it started bothering me. So I unlaced my boot, and here my leg was starting to swell up. It's black and blue. And so I said something to the drill sergeant, and he said, "Well, you're going to training. Go to sick call, but you're going to training." I said, "Okay, sir," or sergeant. So I went to sick call, and the medics at the sick call said, "We ain't got time to look at you. Come back after lunch." So I went back to the unit. By that time, I couldn't lace my boot up. And so we marched back to training, and the lieutenant happened to notice I was limping. So we got there. He waited until we got there, about a mile later. He pulled me out, and he said, "What the heck's your problem? You can't even keep in step." And I said, "Well, sir, my leg is swelling up. It's black and blue." Let me see, and I pulled my pants leg up, and he said, "Oh my God." He said, "You jump in a Jeep, we're taking you to the hospital." I had a broken artery.
Oh my
I
goodness.
broke my chin bone and broke my artery.
Oh, okay.
So I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and my parents and my wife came down for my graduation. Well, here I'm in the hospital. So my wife stayed for a week, and my parents went on back home. And then when I was in the hospital, I seen all these guys come back from Vietnam all messed up, And one guy, he was paralyzed, I'm pretty sure. They had him in this wheel, and they kept turning him. And I got to thinking, oh boy, these guys are getting all messed up, and I'm probably bound there because I knew I was 11 Bravo. So I figured, well, I always looked at it this way: if it's my turn to go, no matter where you're at, you're going to go, you know. And so I got out of the hospital, and then I graduated with another company because the company I was in already went through, and so I ended up down at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and so then I seen a couple of my buddies I was in basic with. They were already down there. They was in 2 weeks already, and so I was on North Polk, I think, if I remember correctly. It was the old part of the fort, and so we had our 9 weeks of AIT, and it was completely different compared to basic training. I mean, every weekend we had off, and during basic training, the whole company was grounded. So you never left the company area unless you went with as a group, you know. Because my wife had come down a couple of times during basic training with my parents to visit, and we weren't allowed to leave the parking lot, you know. I guess they figured that we'd go AWOL, I imagine, because we had one guy we were joking with, and he was sawing logs on a weekend, and we filled his mouth full of shaving cream, and he got madder at Dickens. The next morning we were doing our run, and he went right out the front gate and never did see him again.
Wow.
But anyway, back to AIT, we knew where we was going. We were going to Vietnam, and they kept drilling. Remember, you get a 30-day leave and you're going to be overseas, you know, to Vietnam. And they had that little village, the Vietnamese village you went through, and targets popped up. It looked like Vietnamese, and you had to, you know. And I survived that, didn't get killed. But anyway, that's just play game there. But then the last day, they had the formation. Guess what, guys? Everybody's going stateside. So I got to thinking, wow, I lucked out, you know. But I didn't know for how long, you know. And they said something, I guess it was something to do with the monsoons, that there was so much, the activity, the Vietnamese activity had slowed way down because of the heavy rains. And so they sent us all stateside except for one soldier, and he went to Vietnam. So I'm not sure if the reason why his orders didn't get changed, I'm not sure. But I went to Fort Carson, and so I called my wife and I said, guess what? I can live off post if you come out and live with me. I'm about E2, and we about starved to death. So I was out there for 5 months. The third month, I still hadn't got my wife's ID, so she couldn't come on the fort or anything. So I went in the orderly room and I told the clerk, I said, I'm not going to say the language I used back then, but I said, wish you guys get your head out of you know what, because I haven't got my wife's ID yet, so she can come on the fort. And the first sergeant comes out. He says, what'd you say, soldier? I said, well, sir, sergeant, I haven't got my wife's ID yet, and it's been 3 months. And he said, well, it takes a while. And he goes back to his office. And that was in February. Well, they're levy for Vietnam. Well, here's Merle Delagrange at the very top of the list, a bunch of A's and B's underneath me. So that's, I went home on a 30-day leave, my wife and I, and
So you were at Fort Carson, what, for 5 months?
5 months, yeah. So
And what unit were you assigned to at Fort Carson?
it was an infantry unit, but it was a 5th mech, but I couldn't tell you what company or any of that stuff. I can't remember that. But and we had APCs, and we'd go maneuvers out in the foothills of the Rockies. And they always say that in the spring they usually took the guys and you marched up to Pikes Peak, camped, and made your way up to Pikes Peak. And there's a lot of Vietnam veterans coming back that had 4 or 5 months left. And so here's probably 15 of us that were newbies, and the rest were all Vietnam returnees, you know. And so I got to talking to a lot of those guys, and one guy had an eagle on both his shoulders, so he was in the 101st 2 tours, you know, that I took it. So anyway, he he was saying all the war's winding down, you know, and nothing, you know, nothing going on, you know. And so that made my wife feel good. But then nature took its turn, and my wife ended up pregnant. So then I got my orders for Vietnam. And so we went home on a 30-day leave. And I know it was hard parting with my wife, you know, and at the airport and that. But I told her, I said, well, I'm coming back. There's no way you're going to collect that $10,000 on me. So anyway, I arrived in Benoit.
Oh, where did you ship out in the States from?
Out of Oakland, California.
The Oakland Replacement Depot?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Yeah, I got to see California for 32 hours.
Okay.
And so
Now, when they put you on the levee, did you know what unit you were going to go to?
it didn't really say.
Okay.
Yeah, that I, at least like I can't recall
Yeah.
saying anything, you know. But when I got to Benoit, that had been April, I think I want to say the 28th, I want to say, for some reason. But
And when you got off the plane, what was your first impression of Vietnam?
it stunk and it was hot. Yeah.
That would have been April of 70, right?
Yeah, 70.
Okay. That's right. Okay, so it was hot and it stunk.
Yeah, I just had that awful smell, like unsanitary, you know. And that was at the airport, you know. And so then they put us in buses that had screens on them over the windows. I thought, uh-oh, that must be for a reason, in case somebody lobbed a grenade or something, you know. So they took us out to the base and Army part of it, and we were told we'd be pulling bunker guard. And I got to think, well, that won't be too bad. And so the only sad part about it, I could write to my wife, but she couldn't write to me because I didn't have an address yet. And so I'd write her a letter about every other day. And then we pulled bunker guard at night. And I know the sergeant guard, he said, if I catch anybody sleeping, you won't be knowing it because I'm going to cut your throat, you know. And of course, you know, a bunch of greenhorns, you know, put the fear in us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we still take turns sleeping, you know, because Benoit there, you could see out there probably at over 1,000 meters, and especially during the day. And they had good wire and all that in front of you, but still, one of us stayed awake, you know, make sure, you know. They wanted us to be both awake, but, you know, after the first couple of nights, you got to think, oh, we know better, you know. We'll just put one of us asleep while the other one pulls guard. So you get some sleep at night. But then May the 1st, when they started going into Cambodia, some of my buddies, they went to Cambodia, and then I got orders to go up north. And I remember one gentleman leaving the country. He said, stay out of the 101st. And he said they're having a lot of action up there. And being a combat soldier, I figured he knew what he was talking about. So anyway, we was put on C-130s, and there was 8 of us ended up going to Delta first of 506. But anyway,
So all 8 of you were going to the same
yeah,
company?
yeah. And so I remember we ported in, I want to say May the 7th. It was right after the Maureen deal with our company. We lost 7 guys. That was when Ken Kay, the medic, ended up receiving the Medal of Honor for bravery, you know. And he was from Illinois, and he was only with us like 23 hours, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then when I actually got to the field myself after certs,
certs.
that was a training deal prior to going to the field as a grunt. It showed you about different booby traps that they have found, and what to look for different signs that meant there was a booby trap, and about the poisonous snakes. There was 43 different deadly poisonous snakes I'm pretty sure, I think that was 43 of them, yeah. But, so we went to the company area, and there was guys coming and going from the field on R&R, stuff like that. And so then May the 18th, they flew us, or May the 17th, they flew us out to Firebase Ripcord, which was on the second ridge line. And it was raining, and like I said, there was 8 of us who went to the company, and there was a whole bunch of body bags laying right there at the hill pad. And they said, just find a place to lay down and sleep tonight, and we'll take you out in the morning to your unit. And 3 of my buddies, they got in body bags. And I said, I'm not getting a body bag. And unfortunately, those 3 guys went home in a body bag. Yeah. And I'm not superstitious, but I just didn't feel I should get in a body bag on my own, that is. But anyway, then when we landed with the troops, the company, and they were platoon-sized elements, and they would come together on resupply day. And then I thought I was in the 2nd platoon, because Tony Cox from Indianapolis, he was in the 2nd platoon, and I'd gotten country before he did, but he ended up out in the field before I did, because he was a shake and bake, and they needed NCOs and that. But we walked, and nobody wanted to associate with you.
As the new guy?
The new guy, yeah. They just kind of veered away from you because they probably figured you'd make a noise, and everybody whispered. Nobody talked a normal tone. And being around the Vietnam vets coming back in Fort Carson, they said, they always take Kool-Aid and that to kind of kill the water taste, So me being a little smart, I thought I'd just take some Kool-Aid with me. So I tried to befriend people with Kool-Aid, and they just kind of veered away from me. Well, then the next morning, I had a young soldier that went in country with. His name was Tom Johnson. He was from East Gary, Indiana. And that day we had this was a Maureen Ridge area, and a lot of steep mountains, we were climbing up and down. And we made contact, and so they called in, I want to say the pink team. It had a small prop plane and an F4. I could be wrong on the pink team, but anyway, spotter plane said pop smoke, we pop smoke, and they told everybody to get down. We got down, and here you could hear the F4 come screaming in with napalm. They missed the hill and hit our hill. So everybody's running around the other side of the hill, get away from the napalm, and luckily nobody got hurt, And so then we went up the hill where we had made contact, and we ran across this big round pan that had burnt rice in it, where the Vietnamese, the NVA, were cooking their dinner, I imagine. So we set up an NDP site.
Explain that.
Okay, NDP site is a night defensive position.
Okay.
And me and Tom Johnson, greenies, greenhorns, went with an old timer. He had been in country for 3 months, because it's considered an old timer, you survived that long. And on LP, away from the main, a listing post away from the main body. You were kind of a warning device on the trail. And we were set up. We moved out there after dark. We set up, and at the time, in training they talked about putting your claymores out, and that way if you made contact you would pull back and blow the claymores. But the old timer, I think, he was scared going out with 2 greenhorns, I think, and we didn't set any claymores up. And so then they started calling in Delta Tangles, which is direct targets, That way, just in case you became under attack at night, they'd put a wall of steel around you, and then they'd tell you, okay, move out at a certain degree, and you better be out of that area because they're going to do it right where you're at, you know.
Artillery fire.
Yeah, artillery, and they had 155s shooting it for us that night. I found out later they were 155s. And anyway, the first round threw dirt on us. And the guy who was with us, I think he was Puerto Rican, I'm not sure, American. But anyway, when he called back in, he was broken English, you know, and he said, hey, it's throwing dirt on us. And the FO said, no, it can't possibly be throwing dirt on you. And then they fired into the valley, and I can't remember the old timer's name, but him and Johnson was laying down, and I was pulling the first watch. And Thomas Johnson was over here, and then the old timer's there, and I was setting up here. And they claimed, they said in training that you'd never hear an artillery round come at you. That's a lie. I just knew that thing was coming towards us. And I yelled, I get down, of course they're already down. I threw myself on the ground, and I could feel myself lifting up, the explosion. And I thought, well, it's over with, you know. And I hit the ground, and the old timer, he'd got wounded, and I'd got wounded in the back. If I wouldn't have gotten down, I'd probably be dead. But anyway, he took off running back to the NBC site, and I yelled at Johnson. I said, Johnson, where you at? And he finally answered me. He sounded like he was like 20 feet away from me, but it was dark, you couldn't see. And then, especially something laying on the ground. Well, then when he stood up, I could see him. And I'm pulling guard because I wasn't sure if the gooks were around us and they would come in at us after this. And Johnson came over to me, and I could see dark stuff all over his uniform. And he said, and he looked down, he said, oh my God. And I got to lay down. He laid down, and by that time the medic was coming out, and Tony Cox, he was a Sergeant Tony Cox from Indianapolis, and we tried to get him back to life, but he bled out. And I know that day he kept saying, I'm not supposed to be out here, I'm supposed to be on a fire base or something, because he was 11 Charlie. But I think they were training him for a future FO job, you know, Fort Observer for to call in artillery for your unit and that. So that was my first time I seen anybody die.
And this was friendly fire.
Yes, friendly fire, yeah.
And you said 155s? Or
Yeah, 155s, yeah. And so then I didn't think nothing about my wound, and the medic said, hey, go back in, get some sham time. Go to the hospital, get some sham time. So I followed orders. They put me on a jungle penetrator, and during training they kept saying, you know, if they get under fire when they're above you, because we had trees, too tall trees for them to land anywhere, so they put the jungle penetrator down, and another guy went up on it. I kept waiting for that round to shoot to cut the cable, you know, because they said they'd cut the cable if they had to, if they could become under fire themselves, because if the cable was got attached to a tree or something, it'd pull the chopper down and end up killing everybody, you know. So anyway, we flied to Camp Evans, and the worst guy is we had another guy that came in country with, I want to say his name was Jackson, black guy, his jaw was blown away. And I remember Dean Finch, he was holding his tongue so he wouldn't swallow his tongue. And another guy had an arm gone, and I think it was a guy who lost his leg because the round hit right above our NDP site and just blasted right down on us, you know. So I get to the hospital.
Well, you were wounded in the back?
Yeah, I had a piece about the size of a 22 in my back, yeah.
Okay.
And they dropped the worst guys off, and then they flew the rest of us down to Fubai. I found out later it was Fubai. The next morning, I knew it was Fubai then. But anyway, took us to the hospital, and we took Johnson with us. And I wanted to go over and close his eyes, but I just couldn't. I don't know why, but because he was just staring, and I just felt like somebody should close his eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I guess I was kind of like shell shock, I guess. And so and finally, they treated me last because I was the least injured. And then at 11 o'clock at night, they said, well, you can go now. I said, where am I going to go? And so they had a driver take me over to the CERT's place at Fubai. And the driver dropped me off, says, go in there, they'll give you a cot for the night. So I walk in there, and I had blood all over me from Johnson. And I told Spec 4, I was in charge here, I said, hey, I need a bunk. Well, go find your one. I ain't got time to mess with you. I just wanted to strangle that kid. He wasn't Levin Bush. He had no idea what we just went through. And I just wanted to strangle, pop his head right off. A good thing I walked out the door. I walked out the door and I could not find any empty bunks. So I decided, well, I'll lay down between one, and I got thinking, no, if I lay down, I think there might be a gook on the floor, and be a bunch of fists hitting, So I decided to walk out, and I looked for another building, and it looked like there was sleeping quarters in this one hooch. So I woke a guy up in there, and I said, hey, I just came from the hospital, and they released me. I just came from the bush. I said, I need a place to sleep. There's no empty cots over there. He said, my buddy was an R&R. He took me over to his buddy. He said, just crash right here. So I crashed. I woke up about 9:30 in the morning, and I could see all that blood on me, and I said, well, I'll go see if I can find a mess hall, So I found a mess hall, I ate, and the night before it kept going through me, what I went through. And I got thinking, man, they tried to napalm us, and our own artillery got us. What kind of a unit did I get into? Don't these guys know what's going on here? Did they go through training like me, So anyway, then I had to convoy back up to our company area. And so I report in to the first sergeant, and he said, well, how you doing? I told him, he knew I got wounded. He said, I got a job for you. He opened the drawer up and handed me a pair of gloves. He said, come on out here. So I got initiated into what they do with latrine, the outhouses. They had a 55-gallon barrel cut in half. You stir in some diesel and you light it and it stinks. And I got thinking, here's my punishment for being wounded. So about 3 days later, when they got resupplied, they took me back out to the field. And that time, I went in the 3rd platoon. 3rd platoon and 2nd platoon, there wasn't many guys. There was enough for one platoon, that's about it. Because after the Maureen and this friendly fire deal, there was a lack of soldiers, you might say. But then we pulled a lot of ambushes and made maneuvers through the jungle. And then we ended up on Firebase Catherine, and for a few days. That was in June, and my buddy, one of my buddies that went to Alpha Company, first of 506, and we were facing the west towards Laos, and we were on the 5th or 6th Ridge line back on Catherine. And that was a Firebase support unit, Hilltop. Anyway, A Company came under attack, and we could hear mortar rounds and stuff like an AK M16, 60 going off. They were probably about 800 meters away from us, down in the valley onto another smaller hill. And that's when I found out my buddy died that day. He was from Pennsylvania. Snyder was his last name. We went through AIT and that together, and then since my wife and I lived off post, some of my buddies came out to the house.
Was it Carson with you too?
Yeah, so we had Thanksgiving dinner. My wife wasn't a very good cook back then, but everybody appreciated having a home cooked meal instead of
better than Army job.
Yeah. So that's how I got to know him pretty well. And so anyway, I heard that he passed, and a mortar round came in and got him and a couple other guys. And they were getting ready to take us out to help them, but then the gooks pulled away from them. And they brought all the dead up onto Firebase Catherine. And then I want to say it was like the 19th of June or 21st. We had picked up a chew hoy, and I'm pretty sure it was Firebase Ripcord we had walked up onto and picked up this chew hoy. Then they flew us off to Catherine. And this chew hoy was an older gentleman. He was probably, most of our chew hoys were like 14, 16 years of age. This guy here was probably in his 20s. And of course they age a lot faster than we do as Americans. They seem like their looks, they look older, you know. But anyway, right after chow, I went back to my fighting position, and it was just starting to get dark, and I heard a boom on the other side of the fire base. And one of the guys I came in country with, Rowland, found out the next day it was him, and I can't think of the other soldier's name. Stepped into the fighting position, there's a booby trap in it. And I found him in the wire next morning in front of my position. Of course, I'm sure he probably killed in the blast, you know, that blew him all the way across the hill and to the other side. And I got thinking, and that's two guys that got in them body bags. And we wanted to kill the chew hoy. We wanted to, you know, our buddies are dead. You just wanted to kill him, you know. But they wouldn't. We wanted to put him in the wire and just blast him away, you know. But they didn't let us do it. They took him back to the rear, and then we found out later that luckily a guy was paying attention. We went to walk in the hooch where they slept. They found a wire. He had booby trapped the steps. Then they turned him over to the Arvins, and I'm sure they probably killed him, probably. But
well, didn't they search him when he came in Chew Hoy for
I would
any
think
contraband? Or,
I would think they would have.
Yeah.
Yeah. But see, Rowland, he was his buddy, you know.
Yeah. Of course, on a fire base too, you can pick up a lot of stuff just laying around.
Yeah, because we had grenades laying around and everything else, you know. But
and was this on Ripcord or was this on?
This was on Catherine, Firebase Catherine, because Catherine had got overrun before I got there, so they took us back there to try to rebuild, do the rewire everything around, put new concertina and stuff like that. And I remember I was digging out my fighting position that I was going to be assigned to, and towards the bottom of the existing fighting position, I hit something metal and I stopped. And we slowly uncovered it. Here's an M16 laying there in the bottom, and it was on fully auto. So the guy that mortar round came in and caved in the fighting position on the guys and killed them, you know. So anyway, we had a few mad minutes where they'd shoot up a red flare in the middle of the night, and we'd fire into the wire. And sometimes you get results, like we found a homemade knife laying on the other side of the sappers were trying to get in, you know. They were very skilled soldiers, North Vietnamese soldiers, because at Camp Evans, we had a demonstration. They had put all the Army coded wire, concertina, had cans hanging on the wires, so you could hear it if somebody tried to come through. In broad daylight, we watched that guy come through the wire, and we didn't hear him.
Didn't make a sound.
And we was watching him, yeah. That's how good they were. Because that's what happened on May the, I think it was the 7th, on Maureen Ridgeline. Sappers came in on the company at night. And, but then 4th of July, the artillery group on top of the hill, they decided, since it's 4th of July, they're going to shoot a 4 out into the sky with white phosphorus. And it was a crude looking 4, but you could see it was a 4, you know. It was pretty good. Aiming them guns just right and that. So then we get a call that we're going in for a stand down. And so we loaded up, went into Evans for a stand down. We had a kind of a little barbecue, and they said, oh, we're going out, because stuff was hitting up north of the Ripcord area. And so chaplains came, and I got thinking, chaplains are coming. That means they're thinking a bunch of us ain't gonna make it probably. And I can remember Captain Workman, Donald, his first name anyway. I found out later that he had 4 days and he was going to go home and get married. Well, just so happens that the replacement for him, Donald didn't think that this guy was capable of handling a company in combat. So he volunteered to go out with us. And when Captain Workman came up to me, and because people were taking communion and stuff like that for the chaplains and that, and he said, Dale, that was my nickname, Dale. He said, you want to take, you know, I said, no, sir, I'm fine, you know. And I could see the fear in his eyes. And me, Mr. Tough Guy, you know, I won't be okay, you know. So on the 19th, they flew us out to Triple Hill. And that the 18th is when the chopper got shot down on the Ripcord, yeah. And so we could see the back of the fire base and it burning that. And we sent out listening posts. It was kind of an eerie feeling, you know, like we're being watched, you know. Well, then on the morning of the 20th, they flew us in around 8:05, and there's a spur coming down, and then it was a small hill, so they brought us in the saddle, and at 12 o'clock was we were coming in. At 3 o'clock you headed up the hill to 8:05, and since I was in the 3rd platoon, when we got on the chopper, we was one of the last to get off of Triple Hill, and they said, we got a hot LZ. And I got thinking, well, this might be the end right here, but I kept remembering, I told my wife, she's not collecting that $10,000. So anyway, we came in on a hot LZ, and 3rd and 2nd platoon went off at 3 o'clock, and 1st platoon went off to the right, or to 9 o'clock, and we set up a defensive position, and then we heard gunfire and that going off. 1st platoon had run a patrol down and run into a bunker complex, and that's when 4 of our guys got killed. And Dale Towers, we thought he had died, but later on, after we tried to find the guys, we couldn't find them. We had 2 60s shooting support. Well, the 160 wouldn't work, so I was assistant gunner at the time, and Michael Mann was the gunner, and he kept firing. I was taking rounds from the other gun and tashing it, and just felt like my ears, like somebody took 2 knives and just stabbed me. It hurt so bad, you know, from the gunfire right next to that 60 blasting away. And pretty soon he was just holding it constant because we needed support because guys were crawling down in there. Well, the 60 blew up. And he opened a feed tray to do immediate action, and the spring went flying up to the top of it. And so then we had M16s were shooting down there, and then the guys crawled back, and they couldn't find the dead, you know. And then weeks later, they found out they'd drug them around, the goose had drug them around the corner of the hill. But that night, they brought in some ammunition, because I was down to about a half a magazine. And my buddy didn't have a gun, but there was M16s laying there, but he didn't pick one up. I don't know why. And then Dale Tower's buddy, Randy, went looking for him. And he found Dale. He was still alive. And Dale told us years later that the gooks were going through his stuff, and he played dead. He was wounded so bad. Luckily, he didn't make any noise. But he was a miracle to make it. But then next morning, right at daybreak, all night long, you could hear them moving around us. And daybreak, all of a sudden, you started to hear the tubes popping. And we couldn't move because we were surrounded. And then there were some hills, holes up on the top of that little mound. As you went up the spur, there was a small little flat ground, and there were holes already dug where the gooks had dug holes for mortar pits, I think. Okay. And it only took like 2 volleys, and they had the mortars right on top of us. And I was off the side of the hill. More guys that was on top of the hill where the holes were, they got hurt and killed more, you know, on top. Mm-hmm. Because we were getting, the blast was going up like this, but a new guy, Frank Asher, he was an ammo bearer. He was right behind me in the formation. We walked ranger style, single file, and the trails made less noise. And anyway, I didn't know where he was at because he didn't go with us to put support fire in trying to get the guys back, you know. And then we found him after the mortar rounds. He got killed, you know. And I always figured I should have looked out for him, you know, because he's a newbie, you know. But we got separated. It was dark when we got back to the NDP site, so I had no idea where he was at, you know. And once it got daylight, he was only like 30 feet from me, you know. But then when we got the mortar rounds coming in, we were taking the wounded and get them off the hill, away from the mortar rounds. And I said a little prayer. I said, God, you got to spare me because my wife's pregnant. And it seemed like the mortar rounds quit for a second. We got off the hill and then they started right back up again. So I don't know if they were just transferring rounds or what, but it just seemed like a little miracle time there. Mm-hmm. Time to get the like guys away from.
Answered.
Yeah. It's kind of a selfish prayer. I only prayed for myself though. Yeah. But anyway, we got away from the mortar round, but then they must have had spotters all over the place because they kept following us, you know. And the ground was so hard. You dug down about 4 inches. It seemed like a solid rock. And like I say, when we went to leave the hill, we also had to wait for the guys that set the ambush, mechanical ambush, which was a claymore. It had a wire, tripwire we took clothespins, spring-type clothespins, and there was a tack on each jaw, and you had a wire running off of it. Then you took a plastic spoon handle on the tripwire and held it like that, and when you tripped it, the battery would send
make the connection, yeah. And the current would go.
And we always tried to make sure the battery was out of the blast area so you could unarm it without being in danger. But one of the guys we always had 2 guys that set those claymores up, and that time, one guy got killed. That was set the claim. Luckily, there was still one guy knew where the battery was, so he unplugged it, and we got off the hill, or a small little plane there, and we got back down by the LZ, and then we started medevacing our guys out, and there's a 51 that was shooting at us when we came in on the hot LZ on the 20th, was shooting at the medevacs. Well, we end up, if I remember correctly, there was 2 medevacs shot down our LZ. So then he decided to try to get us out. Well, luckily we had got all the wounded out, but we didn't get our dead out. And the 101st policy was you take your dead with you. And they tried to get us out then, and this was probably around 3:30 in the afternoon by this time. And so here they were bringing the choppers in and picking up guys and flying them out. Well, they were getting guys out, and then a chopper came in, and the pilot had seen my name in the book, the Ripcord 101st Under Siege, and he had notified me and wondered what happened with his co-pilot. And he explained to me that he got shot up real bad and he had to crash, and he didn't have any communication for some reason with us on the ground, and Captain Workman was directing the choppers to get the guys out. Well, it just so happens the chopper crashed and killed Workman, and by that time, I want to say it was Delta Company, 2nd of 506, I could be wrong. They had came in where the 51 was on a hilltop, and it just so happens the 51 had a busted firing pin, and they was able to capture it, and it didn't shot up when they came in. And they set single file protection all the way to our hilltop, the whole company, and they had been shot up, and they had a bunch of greenhorns with them, the replacements. And so then we took our ammunition and a quart of water, left our rucks and that, and I had a personal can and a M60 ammo can. I kept my camera and everything else in. I got thinking that'll work good for shields. I stuck it underneath my shirt, and maybe I'll stop around, you know. And we made it to the other hill. They never even attacked us. Why they didn't attack us, I have no idea. And so we get back to Evans about 5:30 in the evening, I would say. And there was only 2 chopper poles of us left. So I think there's roughly 12 or 13.
Out of how many?
They said we had 85 guys on the ground, but over the years we just can't come up with 85. We come up with 65.
Okay.
But they claim we had 85 because they keep cutting back on our amounts. And like a squad was supposed to have 11-man squad, we were lucky to have 7 or 8 guys in a squad, and we only had 2 squads in a platoon, which a normal platoon was over 30-some soldiers, you know. But a lot of guys kissed the ground when we got to Evans, and we survived, you know. And well, I know one guy, when he got off the chopper, they said, well, we already counted you dead yesterday. They'd already notified his wife.
No kidding.
So they was able to get a Mars hookup, and he was able to talk to his wife, you know. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like today where you got cell phones and
Yeah. Well, wow. So
Yeah.
Did they ever say why they counted him as?
well, I imagine they
or-
just whoever was in charge of him probably didn't see him and thought, oh, he must be dead, and he might have been another area pulling security, you know.
Yeah.
Because I know when Workman was killed, I didn't see it happen, but I was away from it, facing away from it, and I heard the chopper crash, And I turned around, I seen it one laying on its side, but then I found out a workman had got killed, directing it in, you know. But
Okay, this is a good place to stop. I'm gonna have to get another tape.
okay.
Okay. Okay.
And we stood down then at Evans on the 21st, and then
That 21st of
July.
July.
Yeah. And like I say, the next morning, a bunch of us jumped on the Chinook and flew down to the hospital where a lot of our wounded went to. And when we came back, we didn't have much of a company then. I was thinking there might have been about 30 guys, I'd say. I'm not positive on that, but I know Tony Cox and myself, we led our platoon, you know, in the lowlands until we got more supply, you know, more bodies, and then they took us back up to Catherine, Firebase Catherine, until we got rebuilt to company size level again and got officers and that, because most of our officers were wounded and that, and a lot of the NCOs. So through that experience, I went from a PFC in 2 months to Spec 4, and then by October I was an E5. So
So as an E5, what was your duties?
I was a squad leader then, you know.
So approximately how long did it take when you first got pulled out of Evans, or pulled back to Evans? You said you had what, there was about
I'm thinking there was only like 30 of us left.
30 out of a company of,
Yeah, they
should
said
be 90,
80.
but 80 or whatever.
They said he had 85, but we've never came up with. We've always came up with about 65 personnel on the ground.
So how long did it take to build up your strength back to, I hate to use the term combat effective
Yeah,
strength?
I'd say it was probably 2 or 3 weeks before that we actually left camp, left Firebase Catherine and started doing maneuvers again, you know.
So so it took a couple weeks to get back up to snuff. And
Yeah.
what was the, now obviously you flushed in there probably 3 times, 4 times as many new people as
Normal, yeah.
experienced hands.
Yeah.
What was the reaction of the veterans, if you will, to the new people coming in? And what was the reaction of the new people coming into a unit that was, you know, that basically was decimated?
Yeah, I would say that at first, you know, we had the normal newbie, you might say, then they found out what we just went through, and to try to get them to whisper out in the field instead of normal tone was difficult until, you know, we tried to put the fear of God into them, what to expect, and luckily we never had another ripcord, you know, the rest of my tour, but they mostly had to worry about booby traps, and occasionally we'd have contact, but it was nothing like it was before ripcord, yeah.
Okay, so were you at Evans when Ripcord was evacuated, or were you at
Yeah, because
Catherine?
we was at Evans, because ripcord got evacuated 23rd, so we were there for probably just about a week before they sent us out to Catherine, I'd say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after Ripcord was evacuated, you spent the rest of your tour still in I-Corps in the same area?
Right, yeah, we done a lot of the around Catherine and Rockasson area, yeah. And then when the monsoons happened, started up, then we were over by Rockasson, where we could either walk out for resupply or they could truck it up to us to Rockasson or that. We pulled a lot of ambushes out of Rockasson, Firebase Rockasson.
And did you have significant contact after Ripcord?
No, we'd very seldom had any contact, but you still had to worry about booby traps and that. Because one of my soldiers, he just got back from R&R, and it was my squad's turn to go out and look for an LZ till we get resupplied. And we walked quite a ways to find an LZ that was cleared, and we got towards the LZ. We hid in the brush and took a break, and I radioed back up on an LZ and that. So then we returned back to the main body, which was 3rd Platoon, and then I led them down to the LZ, and we made an NDP site close to the LZ, off the LZ. And I told, I can't think of his full name, he was from Pennsylvania. His name, they called him Hank, blonde-headed young man. And I sent him and another guy on my squad on listening post. And I told him, I said, remember we took our break? I said, that'd be a good place to, you can hide and be away off the trail about 10 feet and you still watch the trail, you know. Because on the way down to find the LZ, we followed the tracks. And these were barefooted human tracks, you know. So that night they must have had a convoy carrying stuff in. And you know, I told him, I said, you know, be very aware, because, you know, we've seen the footprints, you know, we could be being watched right now, you know. The listing post, they headed out, and they were in out 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, boom, booby trap went off. So myself and one of my team members, we went out to where they were at, and Hank, they said, was moving debris away so he'd find a place to sit down without making noise, you know, at night. And a booby trap went off right where we took a break. So I don't know if the gooks were watching us when we came down to the LZ and just figured, well, they'll probably be sitting around here somewhere, but they knew we resupplied every 5th day. And so we called for medevac, and the fog was coming in on us, you know. So I went up on the LZ because trees had been cut off with a chainsaw. And so I took the long pipe flare and I loaded it, and I could hear the chopper in the distance, and he said, pop me a flare. So I hit the flare on there. It went up about 8 foot and that way. Almost hit the guy we're trying to evacuate out. There's a defect in the flare, yeah. And I got thinking, man, I just about killed my own guy, you know, with that stupid flare, you know. And he had lost part of his foot, you know, from the booby trap. And so we popped enough flare and we safely got him out. And then we went back to Evans for a mini stand down. And we get back out the field, and my combat medic, Jesse Casillo, he was from Arizona, Tucson, and he said, yeah, I seen Hank in there in the first aid station. I said, why didn't you tell me? I thought they'd shipped him out, you know, to a big hospital. And he said he walked in there to see him, and Hank was sitting in bed there with his leg propped up, and he said it looked like the whole world had dropped away from him. He said, what's the matter, Hank? He said, my dad's going to be mad at me. He said, he wanted me to go to Canada, and I said I wouldn't do that. And now he says, I'm going home a cripple. And Jess said, Hank, your dad's going to love it because you're alive. And I didn't get a chance to even see him off, right? I can't think of his name. I just wish I could remember his name. I tried to contact him, but then the rest of the tour, I went on R&R, and my son was born September the 26th. So when he was 3 months old, my wife brought him to Hawaii, and I got to see him for the first time.
Oh, so you took your R&R in Hawaii
Yeah.
and met your wife there.
And then I had to go back to Vietnam. That was the tough part.
That was very tough.
Yeah. And I probably could have spent another 5 minutes with my wife, but I knew it was going to break down. I just knew it if I stayed there much longer. I didn't want her to see me crying.
And
you know?
when was this? When were you in Hawaii then?
It was December the 29th or the 30th, because New Year's Day.
Okay, so it was
Yeah.
December. So you were in.
Yeah.
You were in.
That's-
You know, probably 8 months before you
Yeah.
got to Hawaii.
Yeah. So anyway, well, it'd been 9 months. 'Cause I had 3 months left to go.
Yeah, okay.
And so, like I was saying, I knew I was going to break down if I stayed by her, and I didn't want her to see me cry. So, I got on a plane.
What was her reaction to seeing you? Because obviously you were a little different guy
Yeah.
when she saw you then from when the last time.
Yeah. Well, she said we were late getting there because we had trouble with the plane. And anyway, when we got to Hawaii, they took us to the R&R Center, and here's my wife standing with a little baby. And I walk up there and I said hello, and I gave her a kiss, and she says, "Here's your son." And she said, my reaction was, "Oh." And I seeing death, and then here's a little baby, I was afraid I'd hurt it, you might say, And she thought that I was disappointed, and I said, "No, I was never disappointed." But I told her years later, after we started having the reunions with the guys I served with, she overheard us talking about different incidents, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me about that?" I said, "To write home and tell you what I was going through wouldn't have done you a bit of good." And her mother wouldn't let her watch the news because guys were still getting killed, and
Oh, it would just increase her level of anxiety. Really.
Yeah,
Nothing
right,
else,
yeah. Because when I got wounded, they said, "You wanted me to report back to your local newspaper?" And I said, "Well," as long as you make sure they know I'm okay." And then there was nothing in the paper at home, I found out, which I was kind of glad. Because my parents, I wrote to them, I'm doing fine, nice day out. I didn't tell them any details what was going on, because I didn't want them to be worried
Sure.
either. Because I remember when my dad took me to the airport, elevator door open, and here comes a Marine out. My wheelchair had both legs off. And he started crying. I told him, I said, "I'll be okay, Dad." And I was. But on Ripcord, I didn't get a scratch, Yeah.
So you spent the rest of your tour just not much contact?
Right, yeah, just
daily
off and on, we
trips,
might seen a gook or something. We'd
doing
fire up a
posts and
hill.
sweeps.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then when you left, where did you leave out of?
Okay, I left out of Cameron Bay, which I went out of Oakland, and then I found out I was going to be coming into Fort Lewis. And my wife's brother lived in California. So after R&R, she went back to California to wait for me. But then I called her and said, "Well, you might as well head home because I'm going through Fort Lewis, and I have no idea how much money I'll have, And back then, as an E5 with actually no time and grade, making a whole $350 a month, And I told her, I said, "Well, I'm just going home," and because she already had a round trip ticket, and I said, "Just going home, and I'll meet you at home." And I get to Fort Lewis and the ETS out of the military, because I already had a year in before I got the NOM. I had $550, which seemed like a lot of money back then. But anyway, I flew home, and I remember when we was at Fort Lewis, and we've been there about 30 some hours, and they said, "Well, you go down for free steak dinner." I said, "No, I just want to go home." And then they came into barracks, and they told that one guy, "Either you get a haircut or nobody goes anywhere." We looked at him, "You get a haircut." you got a haircut. Because we said, we'll give you a haircut. We just wanted to get out of there, you know. And so anyway, on the plane, I fell asleep.
Well, were you discharged then? I mean,
Yeah.
you had no active commitment then, right?
Yeah, I was completely done, yeah.
Oops, gotta edit this. Okay, you were completely done when you signed out of Fort Lewis. You were out of the Army.
Right, yeah, ETS'd out, yeah. Yeah, I got an early day, I got a 30-day drop in Vietnam. So I went home March, I think it was the 28th, I wants to ring a bell, you know. But get home, my wife and mom and my little boy was there to meet me at the airport. And when the plane came in Fort Wayne, Indiana, it hit and skipped going down the runway. And I got thinking all those miles and the plane's going to crash in Fort Wayne. But luckily nobody was hurt and that. But because I know when we got on a plane in Vietnam, we flew to Guam, and there's a guy sitting next to me, a soldier like myself. He was going home too. Now I can't remember his name. And we went and bought a gallon of Puerto Rican rum, and it was gone when we got to Hawaii.
Right.
We were celebrating.
Okay, so you got home. Now, when you got home, when you left Fort Lewis, were you advised not to travel in your uniform? Or?
Back then, there was nothing about traveling with the uniform, and luckily I came in. We landed in Seattle at like 10:30 at night, and all the hippies and that were partying probably, because some of my buddies said that they got off the plane during the day and there was eggs thrown at them, they was spit on, and I don't know if you went through any of that or not. But,
I never saw any of that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I hear individuals talk about it. That's why I asked your question.
And I think coming in late at night, the hippies were out partying, and we got to the Fort Lewis without having any incidents where anybody was throwing stuff at us and that. But I know when I got home, went back to work, I got my old job back. I was a painter when I went into the service, a house painter. Well, then when I was in the process of going to the military, my boss signed up as a union contractor, so he started doing a lot of commercial stuff. So anyway, I come back and some of the guys said, "Where you been?" I said, "I just got out of the Army. I was in Vietnam." "Well, what'd you do that for?" I said, "Well, I had a choice: Canada, prison, or Vietnam. And I didn't want to go to prison. And I love my country. I don't want to go to Canada." That's the way I felt, you know. Being from a small town, there's more patriotism, I guess. You're having a big city, but.
Okay, so how long were you out before you joined the National Guard then?
In '76, I just got my discharge papers in '75.
After your 6-year commitment was done.
Yeah, and my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, he had been a Vietnam veteran too, and he kept saying, "Hey, join the Guard. There's a lot of fun, you know, partying and that." And so I kept blowing him off. Finally, I said, "Okay, I'll go with you, check it out, but I'm not going to sign nothing," I said. So we go to the meeting, and here's 30-some Vietnam veterans, combat veterans. I felt at home, so I signed up for a year, but you could try a year back in and get back out if you didn't like it. And next thing I knew, I had 18 and a half years, and I got up to E7, and I retired after my 20 years letter. I got my 20 years letter, you know.
What kind of unit was it that you were in? Was it an infantry company that you were in? Or?
When I first signed up, it was Infantry Company. The 193rd, it was not an infantry, but it was a MP company. Okay. And then within a month after, they made us infantry. And so that helped me out because I was combat experienced, and my squad leader was a combat veteran too, and platoon sergeant was a combat veteran. So when the platoon sergeant, he got out of the service, so my squad leader, he became the platoon sergeant. I took his job over because I had the combat experience, and then he moved on to first sergeant, so I moved on to platoon sergeant, and then I had a bad accident and I broke my back. and I was,
Related to the National Guard or?
well, that was civilian life, yeah.
Okay, so-
So anyway, I was able to stay in, but then I shattered my ankle on a job, and I was laid up for 6 months. But I stayed in the Guard, and then, but the mess sergeant decided he was going to retire because he had 20 years in, and the first cook couldn't do the paperwork. And he wanted to know if I wanted to take the training, become a mess sergeant, that way I'd do all the humping and out in the bush and that as an infantryman. And I thought, that'd be a cool job, get out of the field. Well, 3 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night in the mess hall. And luckily I didn't have to do any cooking, they probably would have hung me up, you know. But the only cooking I ever did was the sea rats on a piece of C4, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for interviewing. It's a great story. Thank you for your service, and really appreciate spending time with you, Merle.
Yeah, thank you for your service, yeah. I never dreamed I could talk this long.